मैंने बोला था आपकी चेक करने के लिए
तूने तो शुरू किया था थोड़ी से तू चुपचाप के लड़के के साथ बैठा अरे तो बोल ये मुझे भी चार
वो नहीं है ना
तो तेरे हाथ में बैठा था मेरे
को अंदर बैठना उसके बाद इधर से ऐसा कट मारना इधर से कट मारने मतलब ये नहीं जाएगा यो Let's go with the first one. Just do it like 5. Avoid 5. Just punish you.
ये मरीजा बीच में
गुड मॉर्निंग गुड मॉर्निंग सर। तुम ऐसे कैसे आ गए, इधर कैसे आ गए? किसने बताया? रेखा मैम की चलने वाली थोड़ी है, तू ऐसे बीच में कैसे बैठेगा? हट जा। हाँ आ जा। इधर बैठ। क्यों? किसको? क्यों? मुकुंद तो डिक्टेशन फॉलो नहीं कर सकता, उसके साथ तो कोई चाहिए। कैसे तुम फॉलो करते हो? 4 बार पूछते हो। क्यों? इधर बैठ। गेट इन प्लीज, गेट इन। हाँ देखो, तुम्हारा छोटा भाई बहन कोई है तो उसको भी लेके आया करो। Good morning all of you. How are you feeling? Nice, no? You are a new admission. From where? New admission. You were there. When did you join? Well, I'm also thinking 40%. Any more new faces? No, no. One, you all were there. You all were there. But I don't remember I have seen him. You attended my lecture? Bio lecture you did not attend, that means? You attended? That means you did not attend, no? He is also being with us. So we finished what? We had finished with nutrition. We finished with nutrition, no? Digestion, all of it over, no? All of it over. A prompt test, let us take. Take out your notebook. Then you have to study every time. You have to study, you have to study, you have to study. Make your holidays with no planning for long holidays. Ask your parents not to plan for any long holidays. Go for a couple of days and come back. Don't feel so depressed that I'm not going. Go, but 2-3 days. 4-5 days you go, breathe, very nice, fresh oxygen, you breathe and come, not a problem, but don't go for 15 days, then that hangover for another 15 days and the full month of May. If you don't utilize May, then it will be difficult. Nutrition, we are absolutely over with nutrition. The process of digestion also, I think I have explained to you, no? Steps of digestion all done. So let us take few questions. Prompt revision number 1, question number 1. Write on a fresh page. Fresh page, put today's date and write. Today's date is what is it? Third. First question. What is it? First question. Name the cells. Name the cells. Name the cells of the stomatal apparatus. Name the cells of the stomatal apparatus. Number two. Mention number two. That's only one line answer. Only one word answer. That is 2 words is fine. Next, number 2. State the composition of question number 2. State or mention the composition of gastric juice. Number 3. Which enzyme brings about digestion of partially digested proteins in the duodenum. You may get in your question paper first part of small intestine also. Fourth, name the enzyme present in saliva. Name the enzyme present in saliva. Fifth one, the last one, fifth one. What is the distinct color observed? What is the distinct color observed on leaf regions containing starch when iodine drops are applied? Leaf regions containing starch when iodine drops are applied. 5 minutes, complete these answers. Then we will discuss. You will mark for yourself. See how many you are able to answer. Don't see the book. Don't see your previous notes. Try karo. Those of you who are not there in the previous lectures, see if at all your school, are this portion over in school? No. Which school you said? Bodar. What about you? Which school? Is this part of the chapter over in your school? Okay, then you are not in a position to answer this. Wait. Then when I discuss, you will have to take the answers. Okay, just 5 minutes. I will not give you more time. You and both of the same school. So you are sleeping in the class. Absent for so long. How many weeks did the school take to teach this topic? Tell me. How many lectures the school gives this topic? 4-5 lectures definitely. All these days you may have. Absolutely, 10 standard में कैसे? School है, it is not like going to the park. Today I go tomorrow I may not go. School attendance is also very much important. Remember, you're going to apply for the boards. Attendance very much important. Don't ask. Try answering on your own. 3 answers also if you are able to write. Very good. All done.
Not all, not able to answer this second and third.
2 more minutes I give you. Try finishing up. No. You finish your answers. Done? Yes. All of you? Not sure. One answer. That's very good. All done now. Should we discuss the answers? Check for yourself. Done? How many of you got all 5? You know that you have written all correct. Sure, we'll discuss. Not a problem. Keep studying. This type of tests I'll often give you so that you are also aware how much you know the topics. Question number 1. What is the first question I gave you? Name the cells. What is guard cells? What did you say? Guard cells. Don't write kidney. That's a shame. So only guard cells. What are the names of those cells? There are many other cells like the subsidiary and the epidermal, but now for this question you don't have to write those names. Only guard cells, because these are the prominent cells that we understand. Guard cells. Next is composition of the gastric juice. Gastric juice. Mucus. Mucus is also a component of the gastric juice. All the three. So what is the composition of the gastric juice? We should write hydrochloric acid, HCl, pepsin, mucus, and small amount of water also. For that optional, if you write also, it's okay. Don't write also, not a problem. So these are the 3 major components you have to write. Not a problem. Water-based acid is there. Okay. So these are the components that you write. Third, what I gave you. About digestion of partially digested proteins in the duodenum. Meaning, as I mentioned, in your paper you may get a question in the first part of the small intestine. What should you write? What is it? Pancreatic. It's a pancreatic enzyme only. What it is? Trypsin. It's a pancreatic enzyme, that is trypsin. Pancreatic enzyme, it's a component of the pancreatic juice. What next?
Name the enzyme present in saliva.
Salivary amylase. What is the other name for salivary amylase? Chylene. Chylene. So the other name for salivary amylase, I think here I asked you, salivary amylase also known as chylene. See the steps when we had discussed about the steps, we had mentioned this. Chylene. Chylene is the salivary amylase. The other name for salivary amylase. Number 5.
What is the distinct color observed on leaf lesions containing starch when iron?
When the starch containing regions you put blue black. Your answer is blue black. Did you write?
Yes.
Okay, all of you. Any answer that you are not able to write, complete those gaps now. Complete your answers. Done? Now, let us move on to the next part of the chapter. We are going to study respiratory system, the concept of respiration, the respiratory system in human, and the entire concept of respiration that we understand. Now, first of all, to understand what is respiration, what is the meaning of this word respiration? What is the meaning of this word respiration?
Breakdown of glucose.
Now see, what is the relation that we had studied? The first part of the chapter we studied nutrition. And what was the last concept we studied about nutrition is? Absorption. And what was absorption? What is the meaning of absorption that we had studied? The end products of carbohydrate digestion. I start from there. The end product of carbohydrate digestion is what? This also I will ask the next day. Huh? The end product, the last simplest form of carbohydrate digestion is what? Glucose. The last simplest form of carbohydrate digestion was glucose. And we studied absorption. So now what happens? The glucose molecules, the amino acid molecules, if I talk about all, the amino acid molecules, that is of the proteins, the fatty acid molecule, that is of the fats. So all these simplest forms, what will happen to them when I say absorption? What is happening there? What is happening there? Remember we were talking about the villi, and we were talking about the villi. Villi has special features, and then the villi has what? The villi has large number of blood vessels. So now if I talk about the blood vessels there, what will happen? What happens to the molecules of the glucose? The molecules of glucose will enter into the blood. A process known as absorption. This is absorption. So by the way of the blood, now these glucose will go to the body tissues, a process known as assimilation. Assimilation. Remember I had given you a sequence. Yes. Ingestion, digestion, absorption, assimilation, ingestion. The 5 terms. Now we start the story from here next, as we have to understand respiration. Any doubt? All the 5 terms in a sequence we should know. Now, these nutrients which are carried by the blood goes to the body cells, are absorbed by the body cells. Something like, if I understand that now that the blood vessels are running, surrounding the blood vessels are what? Surrounding the blood vessels are the body cells. Now, these glucose molecules which are being carried by the blood, by these bloodstream, will now enter the body cells, So now these glucose molecules, all these glucose molecules which are now in the body cells. What is the fate of these glucose molecules? What should these glucose molecules do now? Inside the body cells, the glucose have entered. By the process of assimilation and absorption, the glucose molecules have entered the body cells. But these glucose molecules now have to be broken down, then only the energy release. Unless and until these glucose molecules are broken down, they are of no use. Even if you are eating a lot of carbohydrate food, sugar-rich food, glucose-containing food, but this glucose, they are not getting broken down in the body cells. Are we getting energy? No, we are not getting energy. So now the next part of the story is that what is happening to this glucose inside the body cells? They have to undergo the process of breakdown, and that is what we are going to understand as the concept of respiration. So what is respiration now? The breakdown of the glucose molecules in the body cells to provide energy. Understanding the relation now? Earlier we studied nutrition. We have already studied that how does the glucose enter the body cells. Now the next part we are going to study that what happens to these glucose molecules. We always know carbohydrate provides energy. Yes or no? We always know that carbohydrate provides us energy, but how? The first part is the digestion over, the absorption over, the assimilation over, and now after assimilation, the glucose molecules have to be broken down, and that is what we talk about respiration actually. Now, earlier you must have come across the concept of respiration as the process of taking in of air and the process of giving out of carbon dioxide breathing. So that is actually a part of respiration. We will study. We are going to study the concept of respiration. The first thing we have to understand the definition. What is the definition of respiration? Let us all write out. What is the definition of respiration? The biochemical process. The biochemical process in which no, my definition is not that. Respiration, what is it? The biochemical process in which glucose, within bracket organic food, in which glucose is broken down in presence of oxygen, to give rise or to release, also you can write, instead of rise you write to release carbon dioxide and energy. To release carbon dioxide and energy. I repeat, what is respiration? The biochemical process in which food, that is organic food, glucose, is broken down in the presence of oxygen to release carbon dioxide and energy. So now, for us to understand what is respiration, we are more interested to understand how carbon dioxide is released, number one, and how energy is released and what is the need for the energy. So now, when we are talking about the concept of respiration, after we understand what would be the chemical equation when we talk about the concept of respiration, we are saying glucose has to be broken down. So this is one molecule of glucose that we are talking about. And then we talk about the usage of oxygen. Now remember that is only for certain organisms. Of course, I'm asking you to write down this now. But there are other forms also where the glucose can be broken down. But this is more found in organisms, more frequently observed in organisms. So we are talking about the glucose, presence of oxygen, getting broken down to carbon dioxide, molecules of water, and molecules of energy in the form of ATP. So this is the most specific type of chemical equation that we understand. We are talking about our cells and all the complex organisms, but there is another method we are going to learn. So this, when we are understanding what is the most important substrate, glucose, and what are the products formed? The products formed are carbon dioxide and water and energy in the form of ATP. What is ATP? Adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate. So this is the overall chemical equation of respiration that we understand. In the exam, you will be asked specifically, write down different methods of respiration, but I start with this. Now, let us talk about a concept of the terrestrial methods and the aquatic methods. Now, if I talk about terrestrial methods, talk about some organisms, terrestrial organisms. What is the meaning of terrestrial organisms? Organisms present on the land. Organisms present on the land. So now when I talk about organisms present on the land, what are some of the specific organs that they have and the methods that they show? If I talk about the terrestrial organisms, they would have organs known as lungs for the process of breathing. And what else? They should be having a profuse supply of blood vessels surrounding the lungs. Profuse supply of blood vessels surrounding the lungs. Now, these are the two features very, very much necessary. I'm talking about terrestrial organisms. I'm talking about terrestrial organisms like all the different type of birds, mammals like us, human also. At the same time, we are talking about all the variety of organisms like the reptiles, and we talk about the variety of frogs and the toads and the amphibians. All of these land organisms, the moment I talk about, all will have a well-developed lungs and profuse blood supply surrounding the lung, the features. But now if I compare with the aquatic organisms, I talk about the aquatic organisms, do they also have the same features like us? No. Now if it is the aquatic, then what should be the difference? If I'm talking about aquatic, remember the differences. If it is aquatic, the difference is they have got specialized organs. Now the organs is in the gills. Now the organs basically would be the specific structures, fine membranous structures that they have, and these fine membranous structures that we understand are known as the gills. The gills present on either side of the head, basically, if I talk about the fishes. But one feature that remains the same is profuse supply of blood vessels there also. Why we are talking about this profuse supply of blood vessels here also? Because the moment we talk about the respiratory organ should always get a profuse supply of blood. Otherwise, the exchange of the gases and etc. cannot happen. So, what is one special feature that you understand? If it is a respiratory organ, which part of the body can generally act as a respiratory organ? The part of the body which is efficient enough to bring about exchange of gases. The part of the body which has profuse supply of blood vessels. So these are the two features always to remember. I'm talking about the lungs and I'm talking about the gills. To compare, gills always present in aquatic organisms, lungs always present in terrestrial organisms. But at the same time, when we are talking about the gills, the fishes, try understanding, the fishes are breathing more number of times than we do. Now remember the comparison that I'm talking about. I talk about a terrestrial organism like us. How many number of times we breathe? Is it understood? How many number of times we are breathing? Neither our ear moves, nor our nose moves, nothing moves. So we are not even able to understand, though we know how many number of times we are breathing in a minute, but we are not even, it is not very prominent, no, every number of time that we are breathing, it's not very prominent. But did you ever observe a fish, the operculum constantly moving up and down, up and down, up and down? Did you see? In the aquariums or somewhere else. So if you observe the fishes in the aquarium also, you will see that the operculum that they have, the fan-shaped structure that they have, no, that head-shaped structure. So there, the fan shapes are constantly moving up and down, up and down, up and down. I think some of you must have observed that. Why are they doing that? That is a method of taking in water, taking in oxygen. Then what are we comparing is, I talk about the water. The amount of dissolved oxygen in the water is much lesser than the amount of oxygen in the air. The amount of oxygen in the air, maybe I compare 1 ml of air and 1 ml of water. When I compare 1 ml of air and 1 ml of water, the amount of oxygen in the water is much lesser. So we say the dissolved oxygen in the water is much lesser than what is now there in the air. So that's the reason we breathe once. When we breathe once, at once we get quite a lot of oxygen. Is that happening for the fish in the water? No, the fish in the water is not getting that much of oxygen that we get at one breath. So they have to breathe a more number of times. For an example, now, if I talk about that in 1 minute, we generally breathe 24 to 30 times. That is a normal breathing rate. 1 minute, we breathe 24 to 30 times. Now, this is almost 3 times more for the fishes. So that means we are in a more advantageous situation, no? How? At one breath, we can take more amount of oxygen, so the amount of energy spent is lesser. But talk about the fish or any other aquatic organism, the aquatic organism is breathing so many number of times, and if I say that we are breathing 24 times and that fish down there is breathing almost about 50 times, so much of energy goes in the process of breathing. In 1 minute, the amount of energy lost for them is more as compared to us. You get questions, how are terrestrial organisms more advantageous? So what are the advantageous situations? What are the advantageous conditions of terrestrial breathing over aquatic breathing? That's a very good question itself. That how are terrestrial organisms in a better advantageous situation when it comes to breathing? The reason is always this, that atmospheric air always has got a much higher proportion of oxygen as compared to the oxygen dissolved in the water. So for any terrestrial organism at one breath, the amount of oxygen taken in is much more as compared to an aquatic organism. An aquatic organism can take only a small amount of dissolved oxygen. So to satisfy the oxygen need, so many times that organism has to breathe. Yes, sir.
Fishes, you talk about aquatic animals, that's significantly smaller than humans. So why do they require so much?
No, because fishes are constantly moving. Whenever you are talking about the body size also, yes, I understand that the fishes, there are some fishes which are much smaller than us. But since the process of movement is so fast for them, they are constantly moving. The muscles are constantly, the muscle mass is constantly requiring energy because they are constantly moving. Since the process of locomotion is so fast, the energy requirement is also quite a lot. But as it is for us, and if I compare a small fish, not comparable. As it is, our energy requirement is much more. But for that particular fish, to satisfy that energy need also, he is almost either breathing the same number of times or much more than us, as it is always. So what is this? There's a particular question that, take that question. Look into this question, the set of questions. Take that. Remember to read this when you are studying this chapter. Look into that page, NCERT question solved. Where is it? Solved question. Page 1. No, the solved ones. NCERT solved questions are there. If you have the textbook,
170
170. The answers are solved. The answers are at the one. If you have the textbook, anybody has the textbook?
Yes.
Find out that set of questions there. The first chapter, find out the set of questions. In this volume, I think this time they have put the answers at the back. Give the question, this one. Yeah, there also it is. This is a new one. In the old one, only it is there. See there, page number 103. Page number 103 in the new book. Tell me what it is. This is the old book. No? Page number 91. Those of you having the new book, page number 91. Can you see the first question? Did you see the first question? Please write it down. Write it down. I'll dictate. Write down that question fast. It is there in the solved answers also, that I'll tell you the pages later. Write down the question, all of you. What advantage over... Right. What advantage, those of you have the textbook, old 103 and new 91, you may look into the question. What advantage over an aquatic organism? What advantage over an aquatic organism does a terrestrial organism have? What advantage does, over an aquatic organism does the terrestrial organism have with regard to obtaining oxygen, for respiration, Answer: oxygen for respiration. Answer: the amount of oxygen in the atmospheric air is much more, amount of oxygen in the atmospheric air is much more compared to the oxygen dissolved in the water. Next line. The breathing rate of terrestrial organisms is much lesser. Terrestrial organisms are much lesser than the aquatic organisms because breathing rate of terrestrial organisms are much lesser than aquatic organisms because the terrestrial organisms can take in large amount of oxygen at one breath, whereas at one breath, B-R-E-A-T-H, at one breath, whereas aquatic organisms need to take in large amount of water, which passes through the lungs, passes through the gills to supply a small amount of oxygen. And hence, they utilize large amount of energy. To take in adequate oxygen. So this is one concept you'll have to remember when we are comparing the terrestrial and the aquatic concepts of respiration. Next is, we move on to understand about the respiratory system. We are going to understand the concept of respiration in phases also, but first of all, we'll talk about the human respiratory system. Now, when we are talking about the human respiratory system, the basic concept of the human respiratory system, to understand this equation, all of you have written down. Please remember to note down this equation. I'm still keeping it here. Now, we start with the concept of human respiratory system. What are the parts and the functions we talk about? What are the parts of the human respiratory system? We start with the nostrils. Then we have got the nasal passages. We have got the nasal passages. The functions of each of these parts we'll have to understand. Go and call William.
Did I just explain?
Not wash your hair now. Sorry, washed.
What's the कुछ कपड़ा रख देंगे. Remove that side, you may put your bags this side. Remove that side. Put your bags.
So now we talk about the respiratory system. Let us get acquainted with the parts. Human respiratory system, what are the parts? You both want to move that side? Let them get ready. You both want to go that side? Girls, it's okay? It's okay, no? You go outside. Now let us talk about the parts. I started with this. See here. What are the parts of the respiratory system? I talk about the nostrils, the nasal passages here. This is the nasal passage. This is the nasal passage we talk about. After that, the pharynx. This particular region, when we are talking about the pharynx, this is the pharynx that you understand. Where the nasal passage will go inside. So if I poke exactly here, just above the throat is the pharynx. So this particular region is the pharynx. The pharynx will be no? So see here, this particular region is the pharynx. Now this is followed by the entire pharynx. But now, if you talk about the tube-like structure here, after pharynx would be the larynx. The larynx is something that we can understand. This part is the larynx. But then we already talked about the food pipe. Then where is the food pipe? This entire tube that we can feel here, and it's a little bit with dents and elevations. Yes, no, it is a bit uneven that we can feel. Is this the food pipe? No, the food pipe is just at the back of it. Food pipe we cannot feel. Food pipe, this is a trachea. This is a wind pipe that we can feel, and the food pipe is just at the back. So then we have got what? This is the entire. This is the larynx, I said, and after that, this is the entire trachea. What is the other word for trachea? The wind pipe. The trachea now bifurcates. The trachea will bifurcate in the upper chest region into smaller tubes, and these smaller tubes are known as the bronchi. Bronchus, individual bronchus, plural would be bronchi. This bronchi will now further divide. Now this particular bronchi will now further divide. How does this bronchi further divide? Now this particular bronchi, you see the division of the bronchi. This particular bronchi will further divide to form smaller tubes. This will divide to form smaller tubes all over. It will divide to form smaller tubes, and those smaller tubes will be termed as the primary, the tertiary, the primary, the secondary, the tertiary bronchi, and the last set of tubes known as the bronchioles, like this. Last set of tubes known as the bronchiole, and every single bronchiole will terminate into a sac-like structure. And ultimately, this sac-like, there are millions of such bronchi in our lungs. These tube-like structures in millions, there are there, and every single tube terminates with a sac-like structure. Not, if you see the figure it feels, it seems that every single bronchi has a cluster. Not that. Every single bronchi has only one sac-like structure. But since the tubes are so many, the sac-like structures are always in clusters. What is this individual sac-like structure known as? Alveolus. Alveolus. And the entire structure together consisting of millions of sac-like structure. This is what we will call it as the lung. A pair lungs. So what are the parts we had come across? The parts we had come across are the nostrils. We have got the nasal passage. After the nasal passage, what is it? We have got the pharynx. After the pharynx would be the larynx. Then we talk about the trachea. Also the windpipe that I mentioned. After the trachea would be the bronchi. Because bronchus, yes, that is the singular word that we talk about. And next is the bronchi. After bronchi, what did we come across? After bronchi is the bronchioles. We talk about the bronchioles. After bronchi, the finer tubes known as the bronchioles. And then the last is the alveolus. What are the parts of the respiratory system? The parts of the respiratory system in human would include all these: the nostrils, the nasal passages, the pharynx, the larynx, the trachea, the bronchi, bronchioles, and the air sacs, the alveolus. Now, talking about some of these features, when we are talking about the nostrils, what is the job? What is the function of the nostrils? Taking in air. Taking in air. So, when we are talking about what is the job of the nostrils, the job of the nostrils, function of the nostrils is what? Taking in of air. Can we write inhalation here? Children start writing inhalation for this. No, not exactly inhalation that we talk about. Taking in of air. Nasal passages. Now, I already mentioned which part was the nasal passage. Nasal passage is the bony structure that we get to see when we are talking about nasal passages. I already mentioned this particular region is the nasal passage. Now, the function of the nasal passage, of course, is the passage of air. Apart from that also, if we are talking about the function is, the first function, of course, we should write passage of air. And the second function is it warms the air. It also warms the air that we inhale. It warms the air that we take in. Now, how do we understand that the nasal passage warms the air? Meaning, the air that we take in gets adjusted with the body before it is driven inside. Now, say suppose we are in an AC room, very low temperature, or we are visiting cold places. What's happening? We are constantly taking in cold air. No, the atmospheric air is already cold. We are taking in cold air. But that air, if little bit does not get modified here in the nasal passage, and every time we will suffer from cough, cold, etc. But that does not happen. Why? Because these nasal passage can also make the air moist. Sometimes when the air is extremely dry and the air starts moving in, the air is made moist here and the air is made warm also here. So what is the function of the nasal passage? It makes the air warm and moist also. Both the functions are there. Makes the air moist and makes the air warm. Both the conditions. Pharynx. What is supposed to write as function for the pharynx? Did we talk about the pharynx when we were talking about the alimentary canal? Yes, no? So the pharynx is the common passage through which the food also will pass and the air also passes. But now how is it possible? I talk about this particular pharynx. And this particular pharynx, the air is also passing through, and the food that we eat, that also passes through. So just up here, it's a big passage, just at this particular region inside. It's a big passage, it's a big tube. And then the tube just bifurcates. The front tube, the trachea, and the tube at the back is the esophagus. So right after the pharynx, this tube, the broader tube, which one I'm talking about, the pharynx I'm talking about, which is carrying the inhaled air also, and which is carrying the food also, now starts getting divided into two tubes. The tube at the back, esophagus, and the tube in the front is the trachea, the windpipe. So what is the function that you are supposed to write? Pharynx, you are supposed to write a common passage for the food and air. That is the function that you write. It's a common passage for food and air. Common passage for food and air. What about the larynx? The larynx is also known as the voice box. The larynx is completely cartilaginous. When I say cartilaginous, what do you understand? What is cartilage? What is cartilage? Connective tissues. Cartilage, you had already studied tissues last year. What are cartilages? Cartilages are a type of a tissue where cartilages are present. We had already understood. Cartilage is present here in the ear. Cartilage is present in the nose, between the bones. Cartilages are present here also. Now that we are talking about the entire larynx, it is just like a box here. The entire larynx is just like a box. So when we are talking about the entire structure, the larynx, the basic structure of the larynx is like this. It is a box-like structure. What is there inside? Fine thread-like structures are there. Fine thread-like structures all over. And now that the air passes through, all these fine threads, they start vibrating. And that is how the production of the voice. So that's the reason when we are talking about the larynx is also known as the voice box. What about the structural feature? It is absolutely made up of cartilaginous structures, cartilaginous box it is, with various different numbers of numerous fine thread-like structures inside. Talk about the trachea. The trachea has got now special features to understand. You get questions on this. The trachea that we understand, I already told you, just run your fingers through the trachea. You are able to find some rings, some hard structures, then some soft, then some hard, and that is almost like alternates. So now, talking about the entire trachea, what is the special feature of the trachea that we understand? The trachea is a tube made up of smooth muscles. It is a tube made up of smooth muscles. When we are talking about the trachea is a tube. It's a long tube made up of smooth muscles. But is that the only feature that we are supposed to remember? We are also supposed to remember that on the outer wall of the trachea, there are C-shaped cartilaginous rings. There are C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Now, what about the C-shaped cartilaginous rings, and what is the benefit or the significance of these C-shaped cartilaginous rings? So, when we are talking about the C-shaped cartilaginous rings, can you see this? The C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Talk about the entire trachea. It is not like the intestinal tube or the esophagus, which is just merely made up of smooth muscles. But apart from the smooth muscles on the outer wall, it has got these C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Now, what is the significance to remember? The significance is that whenever we are taking in air, the smooth muscles has a capacity of expanding and contracting as per the need of the body. So, when we are taking in air, the smooth muscles of the muscular tube would expand. And when we are exhaling air, the tube would contract. But now, when you are exhaling air, say suppose you give out a deep breath. We give out a deep breath. Are we understanding that the trachea is almost like this? No, the trachea is still having a particular diameter. So even when we are exhaling, the trachea is not squeezed. Are you following what I'm telling you? Yes. Every time, now that we inhale air, the trachea would expand. You exhale, the trachea is contracting. We inhale, the trachea dilates, contracts. Exhale out, a deep breath, forcibly. Forcibly also when we exhale out. Am I supposed to tell you that now the trachea is this? No, the trachea is still having a definite diameter. How is that brought about? The C-shaped cartilaginous rings. But why? What would happen if the trachea collapses every time we breathe very forcibly? Then the next time you inhale, you have to take in a large amount of energy. The body has to spend so much of energy. So that does not happen in our body. After forceful breathing also, the trachea does not collapse. How? Why? What is the reason the trachea does not collapse even when we give out excessive or forcibly we breathe out? Because of the presence of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings. We'll write one answer. You get this in the paper of it. Write this. What is the significance of? What is the significance of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings? What is the significance of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings? C-shaped cartilaginous rings of the trachea. What is the significance of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings of the trachea? Answer. The C-shaped cartilaginous rings, on the outer wall of the trachea, prevents the collapsing of the trachea, even after forceful exhalation of the trachea, even after forceful exhalation. Got all of you? What I told, what is the significance of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings? The C-shaped cartilaginous rings on the outer wall of the trachea prevents the collapsing of the trachea even after forceful exhalation. Full stop. This, next line, this reduces the energy expenditure. This reduces the energy expenditure for the next phase of inhalation. Understood what you are writing? So we now talk about the trachea. What are the two features of trachea? That also you are asked at times. Mention the two special features of trachea. What will you write? The two special features of trachea. It is made up of smooth muscles, so it can contract, relax. Number two, it has C-shaped cartilaginous rings on the outer wall. Clear, all of you? Following? Is this clear? Now, what about the bronchi? When I talk about the bronchi, it is something like this. That, say suppose I talk about this trachea, just now we were talking about this. That trachea is there, and this trachea will bifurcate this way. The trachea bifurcates, and as this trachea bifurcates and results in the formation of the bronchi is constantly dividing this way. The bronchi is constantly dividing this way into a number of set of tubes. So now if I have to name this, I would say, what is it? This is the trachea. What about this tube now? This particular tube is the bronchus, plural bronchi. So I would say this is the bronchus. The bronchus now dividing into another set of tubes. What are these set of tubes now known as? This is known as the primary bronchi or the bronchus. This is the primary bronchi. This again, if this is the primary bronchi, this again divides into a set of tubes. What are these known as? This is known as the secondary bronchi, and then the secondary bronchi again divides into another set of tubes. So this becomes the tertiary bronchi. So like this, the entire set of tubes are formed, which forms a network all over. And lastly, now we again come across that this will again divide into another small set of tubes, and every single set of tubes, every single tube terminates into a sac-like structure, and this will be followed further, resulting in the formation of a cluster like this. Then what is this particular tube am I talking about? What is this particular tube? This is the bronchiole. This particular tube is the bronchiole. And what are these sac-like structures we are talking about? This is known as the alveolus. Following all of you? So now when we are looking into this entire structure, this particular structure, the entire structure now, if you have to understand, what is this entire organ now known as? This is now known as the lungs. I am explaining lungs, almost taking out my lungs. And what are you doing there? Huh? Your pen fell down. And why is he busy searching your pen? Now, all these terms in a sequence. So what are the terms in a sequence? We started with what? We started with the nostrils, nasal passages, pharynx, larynx, and trachea. Trachea divided now. Trachea divides into how many bronchi? Two. Trachea divides into how many bronchi? Two. And both these are narrow tubes. What are the differences if I talk about the trachea and the bronchi? Remember, right? Differences between the trachea and bronchi. What are you supposed to write down? When I'm talking about the trachea and the bronchi, remember similarity. If I speak first, they are all made up of smooth muscles. Talk about the trachea is of course broader. And when I talk about the bronchi is narrower. They are always narrower tubes, and the bronchi are formed by the division of the trachea. So these are the points you understand. Now talking about some differences between the trachea, bronchi and their similarities. Trachea, bronchi both made up of smooth muscles. Do both have rings of cartilage? Yes. Bronchi also have got rings of cartilage. Then difference is what? The most important difference is the trachea broader, longer. The bronchi is narrower and shorter. They are narrower and shorter. What about their function now to talk about? Is the function the same? The function is exactly the same. What would their function be then? If I have to talk about the function of the trachea and the bronchi, the function is only the passage of the air. What about their function? Passage of air. Whether you talk about inhalation or you talk about exhalation. This is the function that you're always asked to write down. Write down the function of the trachea, function of the bronchi. Only one function to understand. Differences, similarities I already told you. Now the bronchi enters into the right and the left chest cavity to divide into another set of tubes. And what were those set of tubes we were talking about? The set of tubes are known as the bronchioles. And now to talk about the bronchioles, what did we understand? What are those? The primary, the secondary, the tertiary bronchi. Name the smallest tube-like structures in the lung. What is that? The smallest tube-like structures are the bronchioles. Do they divide further? No, they don't divide further. So which are the set of tubes dividing in a constant manner? They are dividing. These are the bronchi, constantly dividing, primary and then secondary and then tertiary. But the bronchi are those set of tubes which do not divide further. And these bronchi terminate into what? They terminate into a sac-like structure. What are these sac-like structures called? Alveolus. Numerous alveoli. Just like the villus and the villi that we named earlier also. So now if I have to name a number of them together, when I name, I will write down, this is what is known as the alveoli. Name the structural and functional unit of the lungs. What is your answer? Alveoli. Name the structural functional unit of the lungs and what are their special properties. The special properties of the alveolus is almost the same like the villas that we studied. Now talk about one single alveolus. What would be the special feature of this alveolus? Number one, the membrane has to be extremely thin. Did we study this for the villas? Yes. The villas also we studied. For any single villas, the membrane has to be extremely thin. But why? Exchange gases possible. If the membrane is thick walled, will the process of exchange of gases and diffusion be possible? Not at all. For the villas also we understood the same thing, yes or no? The villas, the wall of the villas was thin, made up of one single layer of epithelium. Here also the same feature. What was the next feature of a villas we understood? Supply of blood vessels. Here also the same. See that when we are talking about that every single alveolus should have large number of blood vessels surrounding. So what are the major features? What are some of the major importances when we are talking about that? What are some of the special features for any respiratory structure? For any particular respiratory structure, the wall has to be extremely thin and that particular structure should have profuse supply of blood vessels. Now talk about this. We understand in the later part we are going to understand that the process of exchange of gases is going to happen in the alveolus, not in the trachea or in the bronchi. Why? Because the bronchi and the trachea, these are thick tubes, the smooth muscles and then the cartilaginous ring. So how would the process of diffusion happen? Not possible. But why? How come here we are talking about? Because these are fine membranous tubes, and in this membranous tube, what we come across? What are the two special features? The two special features are they can show the process of exchange of gases. You will write down. Mention the two special features of alveolus. Remember the villi and the alveolus, same things you are writing. Mention the two special features of alveolus. Mention two special features of alveolus. Number one, alveolus are, or alveoli also again, right? Alveoli are the structural and functional, alveoli are the structural and functional unit of the lungs. Structural and functional unit of the lungs. Next slide. Special adaptive features are, adaptive meaning what makes this structure best suited for this function. Special adaptive, ADAPTIV, special adaptive features are, number one, special adaptive features are, number one, thin wall consisting of single layer of epithelial cells. Thin wall consisting of single layer of epithelial cells. Number two, rich supply of blood vessels. Rich supply of blood vessels. Got the answers, all of you? I repeat, thin wall composed of or made of single layer of epithelial cells. Number two, rich supply of blood vessels. Whenever we talk about the lungs always should get efficient blood supply. Otherwise, the concept of exchange we cannot understand. Since we are talking about the blood vessels, little bit about the blood vessels also now we have to understand. Which are the blood vessels which supply blood to the lungs and which is that blood vessel which carry the blood away from the lungs. So far this parts and the functions, anything to clarify? This part is very simple. Only the parts and the functions, one or two functions to remember. Trachea and bronchi, I said if it is trachea during the process of inhalation it can expand. It is a smooth tube made up of smooth muscle. So it will dilate. No, I was explaining that. So I talk about the tracheal tube. If I'm inhaling, it is expanding little bit. And when I'm exhaling, it is contracting little bit. But it never collapses like this. Even when we are running and breathing very, very forcibly, extremely hard we are breathing. Does it ever collapse? Not at all. Why? Because the rings of cartilage does not allow them to squeeze. If it squeezes, then what? The next inhalation we have to put in a lot of energy. So our body can conserve energy by having those cartilaginous rings. Clear? So trachea, bronchi, I mentioned similarity. What were the two similarities I mentioned? एक बताओ. एक similarity बताओ. Trachea, bronchi में similarity, differences both you are asked on the paper. One similarity first. They have cartilaginous rings. ये है similarity. What is the other similarity? They help in passage. But similarity मतलब structural similarity बोलना है. Made up of smooth muscles. आया समझ में? Similarity I have not written down, but I already told you twice, right? What are the similarities? Trachea, bronchi. Structural similarity क्या है? Functional similarity क्या है? ये बोलो. Helps in the passage of air. You are understanding or not? Yes. What is your name? Shubha. आया समझ में? पक्का? So now that I talk about the trachea, bronchi, I have been mentioning three similarities: structural, two, and 1 point of functional similarities. Difference क्या है? What are the differences now? Trachea, bronchi. When I talk about the differences, trachea is a broader, longer tube, and bronchi is formed by the division of the trachea. It is comparatively narrower and moves into the chest cavity. So these are the differences. Now, talking about the bronchioles, what are some special features of the bronchioles I mentioned? Bronchioles are the narrowest tube present in the lungs. Name the tubes which are extremely narrow, the narrowest, minutest tubes in the lungs. Which are those? The bronchioles. How does the bronchiole terminate? The bronchioles terminate into alveolus. How does the bronchiole, every single bronchiole will always terminate into a alveolus. So talk about the bronchiole. If this is a single bronchiole, I understand. Every single bronchiole will terminate into an air sac. What is the other name for the air sacs? Alveolus. Just now we were talking about two special features of the alveolus, the thin wall and the rich supply of blood vessels. Now, talking about the respiratory system, apart from this also, now I was just mentioning about the blood vessels. Let us learn that first. About the blood vessels, I was saying that, क्या doubt है बोलो? Okay. So now next we are going to understand that how is the blood supply to the lungs brought about. This is another elaborate part of the chapter that you're going to learn later. But now to start, say suppose I talk about the heart. Now from the heart, what type of blood is moving towards the lungs? From the heart, what type of blood is moving towards the lungs? From the heart, impure blood is moving towards the lungs, and this is what is known as the deoxygenated blood. एक घंटे का हैबिट है ना? नींद तो आने का कोई सवाल ही नहीं. Concentration, the moment you feel, पक्का ना? Eyes are blinking. 1 hour to 3 hours. Will you be able to keep your concentration that long? क्या करें फिर? Half an hour break. 15 minutes तो मिल ही रहा है.
हम बहुत जल्दी खत्म होता है.
वो तो घड़ी का प्रॉब्लम है, तो हमारा प्रॉब्लम नहीं है.
आपको आधा घंटा
नहीं मिलेगा. आधा घंटा मिलता है ओनली लंच.
after lunch नहीं.
So you all are coming 7:30. What time you all are finishing? 2:15. हाँ तो लोग घर जाके लंच करोगे. You all are there till 6 o'clock. Then 9 hours 10 hours तो हमको तो आधा घंटा ब्रेक चाहिए ना. तुम लोग तो जाके मम्मी का परोसे वहाँ खाना खाओगे.
स्कूल से भी ज्यादा करना.
My dear darling, मैंने पहले ही बोला था, get accustomed to this. Mentally prepare हो गया. School? 7 hours को तो school होता ही है. Make your brain understand that I am growing up. तो यहाँ पे भी अगर हम लोग स्कूल के जैसे बच्चों वाला बिहेवियर करेंगे, then when are you all going to grow up? Don't show me the sad faces. Don't show me the sad. इसको तो नींद भी आ रहा है. 15 minutes का break मिलेगा. All of you will go out of the class. Nobody will remain in the classroom.
मैम नीचे जाते हैं.
नीचे तो मैंने बोला ही नहीं. I said go out. There's such a big space there. Go out, walk, go खाना है खाओ, and then come back. Don't sit here and then when I come back, don't show me those sleepy faces again. Huh? I cannot stop here. ये topic खत्म कर रहे हैं. Now, try understanding.
स्कूल जैसा ही है, दिक्कत नहीं है.
Fourth, हाँ तो अभी पहले लंच तो सीखो, उसके बाद हर्ट पे जाना है. अभी हर्ट अभी फिलहाल यही हर्ट है. So now try understanding. Listen. 2 minutes already मैंने 5 minutes तो दे ही दिया. Sleep early, get up early. During these days, make a habit. Sleep by 10, 10:30 latest.
Yes.
When to study, you go home by 2:30.
Then we take a little bit of.
Even if I understand that you take 1 hour for lunch and another 1 hour for your phone time and the device timings.
Maximum 5.
So then also by 6 o'clock you can sit to study. How many of you are studying in this month? I don't know. Should I ask this question? In this month of May, how many of you are studying? This super batch. So ये सारा पूरा batch में we can expect 95 and up. All of you. Labors में बच्चे पढ़ रहे हैं. That is something unbelievable. पढ़ाई हो रहा है. How many of your parents are constantly yelling at you to sit and study? तो that में झूठ बोल रहे तो you're not studying. Mama is screaming, meaning you're not studying, no?
नहीं मैम. If we study 3 hours, they want us to study 4 hours.
Why have to tell you to sit and study? No. For a child, you study. Somebody is not telling you because you are not studying or you are studying too much.
I studied that. It's not common.
इसका friend कौन है? इसका best friend कौन है? झूठ बोल रहा है. इसका चेहरा देखिए.
नहीं मैम वो पढ़ता. हाँ मैम ये रोज पढ़ता. अच्छा.
स्कूल में पता चलेगा सब.
मैम कभी कभी तो मैंने पढ़ा.
हाँ, सच है. Study. See again, I tell you my same old sentence जो तुमको last day तक सुना है. Parents have sent you here. You have got my sentence by yourself. So now that you are here, nothing less than 95%. Otherwise, it's a waste. खांसी हो रही है. पानी दे दो इसको. Jokes apart, now that you are here, try see that you find a balance between study and play, everything. I'm not saying that you don't do anything else apart from studies, but nothing less than 95%. Otherwise, it's not worth. Remember, spending so much of time here and the rest. So please study. Find out time for everything. Now we are talking about the blood supply to the lungs. Blood supply to the lungs connected with the heart, straight away we understand. Heart supplies deoxygenated blood. What is the meaning of deoxygenated blood? Impure blood.
It does not have oxygen.
What is the definition? I will tell you. First, let us learn this. The blood supplies deoxygenated blood by the way of a vessel, and this vessel is known as the pulmonary artery. This pulmonary artery is carrying what type of blood? Impure blood, deoxygenated blood, and this pulmonary artery will carry the blood to the lungs. And what is happening in the lungs? A process known as exchange of gases, and we are going to name it as oxygenation. What is this called? Oxygenation. What is meant by oxygenation? The process of exchange of oxygen, carbon dioxide, which is happening in the lungs. From the lungs, when the blood is coming out, by which vessel? The vessel is now known as pulmonary artery. The vessel is known as pulmonary vein. The vessel is now known as pulmonary vein. But what is the nature of the blood to understand now? The nature of the blood is now oxygenated, and this oxygenated blood will now enter into the heart bag by the way of the left atrium. I'm just mentioning at random certain names, which again in detail you will come across. So talking about this entire scheme, what is the sequence in which the blood vessels carry blood to the heart and away from the heart? Now here, as of this part of the chapter, you are supposed to remember the name of this vessel. Name the vessel which carries blood towards the lungs. Pulmonary artery. Name the vessel which carries blood away from the lungs. Listen. Name the vessel which carry blood away from the lungs. Pulmonary vein. What is the difference between this and this particular vessel? They carry deoxygenated blood. Pulmonary vein carry oxygenated blood. Then what is? Yes. Pulmonary vein. Pulmonary artery. Pulmonary vein. Deoxygenated, oxygenated. This is left atrium. This is a chamber of the heart. Right now I'm talking about. Or straight away, as of now, you understand from here straight away goes to the heart. That also is okay for you now. What is the basic difference between oxygenated and deoxygenated blood? Always remember, if I'm talking about deoxygenated blood has less of oxygen and more of carbon dioxide. This should be the definition always. What is the definition of deoxygenated blood? What is meant by deoxygenated blood? Blood which has a higher proportion of carbon dioxide and a lesser proportion of oxygen. You should never write blood which has carbon dioxide. Always students generally write this. What is deoxygenated blood? Blood which has carbon dioxide, or which is carbon dioxide rich also. If you write, it's okay. Deoxygenated blood means what? Blood which is carbon dioxide rich. And oxygen is there. Yes, oxygen is there, but comparatively lesser. But are we understanding that this is something around 98% and 2%? No, not such a difference. This difference is wrong always to understand there. Now that I talk about more of carbon dioxide, meaning it may be something roughly like this. The difference is not this much. Always understand. उतना कभी नहीं होता है. The difference is just by 10 to 15%. उससे ज़्यादा नहीं होता है.
But where is the carbon dioxide coming from? Because when we
The carbon dioxide is coming from the body tissues. We will learn. The carbon dioxide is coming from the body tissues. So remember, now that we are talking about, again, if I talk about oxygenated blood, the blood will have something around 50-55% oxygen and maybe 45% carbon dioxide. Only that much is the difference. The difference is never by 80 and 20 or 90 and 10, never like that. So what are we learning here? Only two major set of words. Deoxygenated and oxygenated blood means what? What is the difference between the pulmonary artery and the pulmonary vein? And what is the job of lungs in the entire process? Lungs always has got 5 air sacs. What are these air sacs called? Alveolus. What happens in alveolus? Now that I talk about oxygenation, what is happening? If it is the alveolus, alveolus will give away the oxygen to the tissues and take the carbon dioxide from the tissue. That is the job. That is the job. We are going to study this. So now next is, after we understand what are the different parts and the blood vessels of the respiratory system, the last part here that we come across is what is there below the lungs, which very much helps in the process of respiration? A muscular sheet. And what is this muscular sheet known as? This particular muscular sheet is known as the diaphragm. This particular muscular sheet is known as the diaphragm. What is diaphragm? It is a muscular sheet present at the base of the respiratory or base of the lungs. What is the definition of diaphragm that you should always remember? Diaphragm is always present at the base of the lungs. You just look in the diagram that we have in your book also. Check if it is shown clearly. This is the same. Okay, the diaphragm is not seen. This one. See there here. What is diaphragm? What is diaphragm? What are the changes? We are going to learn later. What is diaphragm? First of all, the diaphragm is a muscular sheet, not made up of cartilages. It is a muscular sheet, and since it is muscular, it has the capacity of contraction, relaxation. Two features we are going to understand later when we talk about the phases. How the diaphragm plays a major role in the process of breathing. We'll stop here, continue again after the break.
निकल टिफिन निकल अभी मैं मेरा दिमाग से नहीं पाया
नहीं मुझे लिटरली पता नहीं था।
तेरे को अगले 4 दिन तक नीचे आए मेरा
नहीं,
वहां पे
वैसे मुझे कैसे पता कि वन घंटा पहले
भाई उसके पास ऑलरेडी स्टाफ है उसको उनके साथ रहना पड़ेगा।
मुझे लगा 9 सेकंड से हुआ है।
चल नेक्स्ट टाइम
I did check. I didn't because I assumed start time would be the same as Wednesday.
वेंसडे को भी जल्दी था
So Wednesday को 9:15
और इंग्लिश था पहले हिस्ट्री था पहले
मुझे पता नहीं।
तो टाइम पे कुछ कल क्या है
कल मैं
कल सैटरडे ना कल से दो को है जोन लगा के
मैं मार्कर से कलर मिल गया
नहीं होता नहीं मैं लाती हूँ
नहीं
अरे मैं लाती हूँ मेरे पास पूरा सेट है
नहीं का हाथ में चाकू
ऐसे शर्ट पहनना और इधर से बटन अनबटन करके